Okay, I think we are ready to begin. So let us start with 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then we will have the salutation to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, and today, wow, is August 28th. It's hard to believe that time flies by just so quickly. Seems almost like about 2 weeks ago that we ended the winter break and started the spring program. And now here it's already, we're getting close to the autumn. Okay, so now we are continuing now with our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Forms. And the last class we were discussing Sutta number 171, which is a rather long and complicated sutta. And it seems to have 2 distinct parts, which are rather loosely connected. And we did most of part 1. So just to do a quick overview of this part of the sutta. So the text speaks about bodily volition as being, of course, it's expressed through the body, and it's a condition for pleasure and pain to arise internally. Similarly, there is speech as the instrument through which verbal volition is expressed. Volition manifesting or expressing itself in the form of speech. So you could say when there is the vocal apparatus, then verbal volition can manifest or express itself in the form of speech. And that becomes a condition for pleasure and pain to arise internally. The pleasure and pain here, this would be, well, let's just finish. So then there is the instrument is the mind. The mind is the instrument for the volition that remains purely internal without expressing itself bodily or verbally. And then that mental volition is also the condition for which pleasure and pain arise internally. So the bodily volition, verbal volition, mental volition, these constitute karma. Let me just get notes file. So we have karma. We use the Pali form. Let's say bodily, verbal, and mental. And according to Buddha, what underlies karma, the sort of root of karma, or the force that turns into karma, is volition. And the Pali word for volition is chaitana. And in the formula for dependent origination, chaitana is designated sankhara. So we have the volitional activities sankhara, which are motivated by chaitana, and these sankharas create kama. In fact, what you can't see so easily in the Pali words themselves, but if you know the roots, the word sankhara is constituted of a prefix, sam, plus we have a derivative of the verb karoti. The verb karoti gives us kama, and you can see this maybe more clearly in the Sanskrit word karma. So it's from the verb karoti. And from karoti, we also get that kara, meaning deeds. And so to get the word sankhara, we have the sam joined, the sang joined with kara. And what happens in Pali, just because of the way the language forms, so to ease the connection between the ung and the k, it turns into an aspirated k. So it becomes samkara or sankara, same word. So it's all derived from the verb karoti, which means to act or to do. And so we know in the formula for dependent origination that out of the sankharas will come consciousness, then from consciousness, name and form. From name and form emerge the 6 sense bases through which we experience the world. These 6 sense bases, 6 sense faculties make contact with objects of the world. And then from that contact arises Vedana, or feeling. And feeling can be pleasant, painful, and then there's the third kind of feeling, which is neutral feeling. And so we could see here in this statement a concise formulation of the chain of dependent origination up to the stage where pleasure and pain arise through the maturing of the karma. This is the law that the Buddha discovered and expressed and formulated so many times in his teachings. And this doesn't mean that the kama or the sankharas will inevitably produce pleasure and pain. Doesn't mean that every kama that we perform will inevitably and unavoidably ripen in a particular way. But the karmas are always intimately and integrally interwoven, interconnected, mutually conditioning each other, so that the way a particular karma matures or ripens depends on many factors, including our present activities. So if we have, for example, a karma which is tending to produce strong bodily affliction, if we are careless in the present, then our carelessness might give the opportunity for that negative karma to ripen in the form of disaster. For example, I might have from the past the karma tending to strong bodily affliction, and I go out drinking, and then I drive home while I'm partly drunk, and then I drive through a red light, and another car comes speeding down, then there's a crash. In that case, the karma has gained the opportunity to ripen because of my carelessness. But if I have that same karma, but I always act carefully, with mindfulness, with clear comprehension, that might prevent the karma from ripening altogether. Or if the karma is going to ripen, it might ripen in a rather weak way rather than a strong way. Okay, so then the Buddha then brings in here the last statement in this opening paragraph, again, sort of alludes to the formula of dependent origination, since he says that what underlies all this whole situation, whereby action, volition expressed in action, creates the conditions for pleasure and pain, what underlies that whole thing is avijja, or ignorance. And so here we have avijja, or ignorance, as the condition for the sankharas. And through the sankharas, eventually arise Vedana. So ignorance is the deepest, most fundamental condition for this whole situation. Yeah, we don't have to go into the further distinctions in the ways of performing action. Okay, so now in the last paragraph, in this first part of the sutta, the Buddha says that ignorance is comprised within these states. Yeah, so then the commentary makes a useful comment here. It says that ignorance is comprised in the volitional states, that's the sankharas analyzed above, functioning both as a coexistent condition and as a decisive support condition. So these are rather technical terms that come out from the Abhidhamma system of the Patana, the last book of the Abhidhamma, which lays out a scheme of 24 conditional relations, 24 ways in which one factor of existence, bodily or physical or material factor, mental or material factor, can condition other factors. And of those 24 conditions, probably the two most important conditions, or at least the two which create sort of clusters, or would serve as the nuclei around which other conditions cluster, are the coexistent condition, sahajata, which means arising along with, and decisive support condition, which is the condition of one thing operating upon another through a gap of time. So it's not coexistent, but operating over a period of time. So how does this work in respect to the kinds of sankharas? Okay, so we have three unwholesome roots of karma. What are the three unwholesome roots? My memory is getting bad.
Craving.
Greed, hatred, and delusion.
Yeah, of course. And then we have a bunch of other, secondary defilements. Okay, so when there's any kind of volitional activity originating from greed, hatred, and delusion, then ignorance will be present as a sahajata pachaya, a coexistent condition. And then that gives rise to unwholesome volitions. which create unwholesome karma. And then that will tend to give rise, when it ripens, to suffering or pain. Okay, when I say ignorance is a coexistent condition for greed, hatred, and delusion, in a way that statement is a little bit inaccurate, or it has to be qualified. Can anybody tell me how it should be qualified? It's a little bit of a tricky question. Anybody?
Suffering. Suffering?
No.
Would it be craving or desire?
No, I haven't heard the word that I'm looking for. I said ignorance is a coexistent condition for greed, hatred, and delusion. Maybe Yvonne?
Yes, Bande.
I think you should be able to answer this.
Sorry, but Bande maybe delusion and avijja could have been similar.
Oh, yeah, you're on the right track. They're actually, technically in the Abhidhamma, they're the same thing. So that's the point. Ignorance is really, literally, it's a coexistent condition for greed and hatred, but ignorance itself is delusion. So very good, you really got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so ignorance. So I just expressed this just a little bit metaphorically when I say ignorance is a condition for greed, hatred, and delusion. Because ignorance itself, technically, is, when you bring it down to the level of individual mental factors, ignorance and delusion are the same mental factor. So ignorance is really a coexistent condition for greed, hatred, and all of the other secondary defilements. But the important point here is that when greed, hatred, conceit, wrong views, jealousy, envy, miserliness, competitiveness, anger, resentment, all of those other unwholesome states arise. Negligence, laziness, vanity, arrogance. When they arise, then ignorance is the coexistent condition. They're existing together in the same state of mind, the same citta. But when the commentary says ignorance is a decisive support condition, so ignorance is a decisive support condition even for wholesome volitions. Well, let's say for wholesome, mundane wholesome volitions. Because even though the wholesome volitions are good and desirable and create beautiful karma, wholesome karma with the capacity to ripen in happiness and to promote our well-being and our good external conditions, favorable external conditions, and that they contribute to our progress along the path. But still, even in the mind, the mental states, the cittas that generate the wholesome volitions, ignorance is lying at the base of those conditions. as a, say, as an underlying tendency. And so it's because ignorance has not been abandoned in the stream of consciousness that our wholesome volitions create karma with the capacity to sustain and to maintain and to prolong the round of birth and death, the round of samsara. And so as if we're going to gain liberation, we have to engage in wholesome activities motivated by the mundane, wholesome volitions. But on their own, these mundane, wholesome volitions are not sufficient for eradicating ignorance. To do that, to eliminate ignorance, one has to generate the wisdom that sees into the true nature of things, especially the wisdom that penetrates through the three characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, and realizes the Four Noble Truths through direct experience. And so then the text tells us with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance, that body does not exist, conditioned by which the pleasure and pain arise internally. The speech does not exist. The mind does not exist, conditioned by which that pleasure and pain arise in one internally. Yeah, I think this statement can be interpreted in two ways. But let me just take the last sentence. Okay, so it says, that field does not exist. I think the Pali word here is keta. That's the field in which a farmer will plant seeds. That site does not exist. That base does not exist. That location does not exist, conditioned by which that pleasure and pain arise in one internally. Yeah, the commentary gives us some explanation of this. So it says that arhats are seen acting with the body, so they still continue to act physically. They sweep the courtyard, they go out and return, they do their various duties and so on. But in the case of the arhats, their volitions occurring at the bodily door no longer generate karma, and so they're no longer capable of producing karmic results. And so the commentary says it is the volition that occurs at the body door that is intended by the word body, and the same applies to the other two. And so arhats will speak, they give talks, they'll have conversations and discussions, but their volitions don't generate karma. And of course, they'll have thoughts, intentions, plans, and so on, but their thoughts and mental activity don't generate karma. So in that case, we could say the body does not exist, the speech does not exist, the mind does not exist, that serve as the conditions that create the karma, that serves as the conditions for pleasure and pain to arise in the future. Okay, so this takes us through the first part of the sutta. So now if there are some questions, and somebody had a question at the beginning of the class. Was this Mei Ling? I don't remember who. Whoever had the
Yes,
condition. Was that
yes,
Mei Ling?
Bhante. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, Bhante, as this ignorance are still underlying at the base of the practitioner. So
Yeah.
that is why when one is said to have attained the liberation of mind, it's a right to say that he still has that tendency. I mean the ignorance and the still in this attainer's mind.
Yeah, so for somebody who attains liberation of mind, is
Yes.
ignorance still sort of deeply buried at the bottom of that state of mind? That's the question?
Yes.
Yeah, there are different kinds of liberation of mind that are spoken about in the suttas. So there is a kind of worldly liberation of mind. For example, the jhanas can be called a liberation of mind because the mind in the jhanas is freed from discursive thinking, from the 5 hindrances, from discursive thinking, and it's absorbed in very deep bliss and joy and peace. And also they speak of the liberation of mind through the 4 Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. That's a kind of liberation of mind. There is a liberation of mind through the nothingness. It's called the Akinchana Ceto Vimutti. That is the 3rd formless meditation. It's a kind of liberation of mind. Yeah, so those are liberations of mind which come about through the power of samadhi, not through wisdom. And in those kinds of liberation of mind, the defilements are still not yet abandoned, not yet eradicated. So even though the ignorance and the other defilements are not actively present in those states of mind, but they still lie dormant or latent within the stream of consciousness of the practitioner who attains that liberation of mind. So that is what we would call just maybe the expression used in the text, that is a kupa ceto vimutti, which means it's a shakable liberation of mind. That it's not, or also it's called, I think the expression is samayika ceto vimutti, a temporary liberation of mind. And so this practitioner can lose that liberation of mind if they become careless and negligent and heedless and starting engaging in worldly activities, they can lose it. But there's another liberation of mind, which is called the unshakable liberation of mind, or the I think it's the asamayika. Maybe it's the asamaya. I think it's asamaya ceto vimutti. And that is unshakable. That is the permanent liberation of mind. And this is also referred to, we see it referred to again and again in the suttas as attaining the ceto vimutti, panya vimutti. So it's one state in which you have both ceto vimutti and panya vimutti, liberation of mind, which is also liberation by wisdom. And this is equivalent to the fruit of arhatship. So in this case, with ceto vimutti, panya vimutti, the defilements, all stemming from ignorance, have been eradicated. So now there's no longer any traces of the defilements beneath that liberation of mind. Okay, so any other question? Oh, I see some hands. Okay, Ali H.
Thank you, Monte, for your teachings. I understand that the greed, delusion is embedded in the greed and hatred, but also, am I correct to say that just a synonym for delusion is ignorance? Because I had a hard time getting into the delusion part, understanding it if it's a standalone. I understand it's when it's embedded in greed and hatred, but standalone delusion is all ignorance, correct? I mean, that's how to describe it?
Yeah, and
Okay.
this is sort of in the Abhidhamma system. But also, there are some indications of this in the suttas. When the text will use sometimes the word delusion, sometimes they use the word ignorance, but they are referring to the same quality. Generally, when they use delusion, it occurs in connection with greed and hatred. So we have the three: greed, hatred, and delusion. Their delusion is ignorance in the role of being a psychological root of karmic actions. So sort of in a moral or psychological sense, the word delusion is used. And the word ignorance is generally used when the Buddha is expounding or explaining the causal dynamics that underlie samsara, the process of repeated birth and death. There it's ignorance that's used.
Okay, thank you. And then what would be the opposite of the ignorant? Of delusion? Is it clear saying?
Yeah, the word that's used as the opposite of delusion is simply a moha, non-delusion.
Non-delusion. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then,
but there are a whole bunch of words which have basically the same meaning as non-delusion. You could have panya is wisdom.
right. Yeah.
Then vijja, which is the positive side, opposite of ignorance. Jnana, not higher knowledge, and so on.
Okay. Thank you, Ante. Can I ask a question about karma? What would be like a collective karma, like in the car accidents or something like that, or maybe a plane crash? Those people that are in it, they have no control, or they have not caused anything to, be subject to such things. So what are the explanations on those situations that, people pass away maybe in a car accident or collective karma, or I don't know what that,
Okay.
how does that describe?
Yeah, well, actually, there seems to be two questions here. One is, how is it that people will meet with accidents as a result of karma if they're not doing anything to bring on that accident?
Yeah. Yes, that's my question.
Yeah, that's just because there can be strong karma from the past, which has to manifest in a particular way. And when that karma gets the opportunity, even if the person is not in any way responsible for its maturing, but when it gets the opportunity, it will mature. Okay, but that's a bit different from what's called collective karma. Technically, in the Theravada Buddhism, we don't have the idea of collective karma in the sense that a whole nation that people belong to a whole nation or racial group or religious group have a karma just by virtue of belonging to that nation, racial group, or religious group. But rather, it's if people in the past have performed a particular action together, then through each one's individual volition, they are creating their own karma. But the fact that they perform that action together creates a tendency for them to experience the results together. So let us say just back in New England, was it the 17th century, 18th, 17th century, say, a group of people engaged in a witch hunt and burning women on the stake as witches. So they perform an unwholesome karma together. And so that is creating a karmic tie between them, which can manifest in them receiving the results of that karma together. But it's their own volition that creates the karma, not belonging to the group. Okay, we'll have to move on now.
Thank you very much, Bhante.
Okay. Lim Kim Hung.
Thank you, Bhante. My question is, in the suttas, we often read that ignorance and craving is the cause of suffering. Why is it that only these two links are always mentioned? Will the whole mass of suffering cease if any other 10 links out of the 12 are cut off beside the above mentioned two links?
Well, those are the two which are called the roots, the deepest roots of the dependent origination. And even craving itself is mentioned because it's considered the strong root from the present life leading into future lives. But behind craving, there's always ignorance. So really what has to be done to end the whole series of the 12 links is to eliminate ignorance. One can control craving, through sense restraint, through mindfulness, through meditation practice, but just those practices on their own are not sufficient for eliminating craving entirely, because craving stems from ignorance. And so to get rid of the underlying foundation of craving, you have to get rid of ignorance. There's no alternative. Okay, we'll move on to Marcel.
Thank you, Bhante. I'd like to ask about secondary defilements.
Yeah.
Firstly, sadness for other people's misfortune. Is it a secondary defilement or is it compassion? For example, recently I heard my friend is diagnosed with cancer and I feel sad for her. Is it something that I need to overcome according to Buddhism?
Yeah, this is a bit of a tricky question, but my opinion of this is a little bit different from the tradition. Okay, so first, what the tradition says is that when you feel sad about something, that sadness is the mental feeling of domanassa. Domanassa is always said to be associated with a citta rooted in aversion, because you don't like the situation. And so because you don't like the situation, so that's what makes you feel sad. And so what I would say is that what one has to do is turn sadness into compassion. And in compassion, there won't be according to theory, there won't be sadness, because the compassion is said to be a wholesome state in which sadness, there's no aversion to the suffering that people are undergoing. And so in that case, one is not experiencing sadness. But in my own experience, things have worked out a little bit differently. Like it seems when I feel compassion for people who are undergoing suffering, I feel some kind of sadness for their suffering. I feel a kind of sadness along with their suffering, but I don't regard that as being an unwholesome state. It seems to me that it's almost a natural accompaniment of compassion. But it seems like the kind of sadness that one has to eliminate is the sadness for oneself. But when I sort of reflect upon the suffering that people are undergoing, particularly say this past week, hearing about the bomb explosion at the Kabul airport, and all of the people who would have lost their lives, and then the relatives who would have lost loved ones, I feel deep compassion for them, but also there arises a sadness for them. But I'm not feeling sad for myself. but it's maybe a feeling of sadness for others. Maybe that sadness for others is compassion. And maybe it's different from the sadness that is designated by the word domanassa that we have to get rid of. Yeah, so that's my take on that question.
Thank you very much, Bhante.
Okay, Matthew.
Thank you, Bhante. I have a question about that statement, ignorance is a decisive statement or a decisive support condition,
yeah.
even for mundane, wholesome
Yeah.
volitions.
Yeah.
So it seems like you could interpret that maybe as that we can accidentally do good things, but for the wrong reasons. And I guess I'm just wondering if, if like today I show up to this sutta study, or today I think I should ask a question, and maybe I'm doing so out of ignorance, or I'm not here for the right reasons, but it seems like we want to sort of add lots of things that we think are, wholesome volitions, mundane wholesome volitions, to help eventually overcome that ignorance. And I'm just wondering if I'm kind of misunderstanding that statement.
I think that could be a partial explanation. It seems a rather open-ended, the statement that ignorance is a decisive support condition for the mundane wholesome volitions. So probably there are multiple ways to interpret that, and that could be one way to interpret it. But let's just suppose, somebody doesn't have any understanding of Buddhism, but somebody, say, is working actively for a charity, and they're doing this with good motivation out of compassion for others. And so in the course of their activities, they are giving rise to many wholesome volitions of a mundane character. And those mundane volitions, because ignorance is not yet abandoned, so that ignorance is, say, impregnating those mundane wholesome volitions with the capacity to continue to maintain the ongoing cycle of birth and death, and then to give rise to desirable results in the course of birth and death. Yeah, so in that sense, ignorance is a decisive support for the wholesome volitions, in that, for the mundane wholesome volitions, in that ignorance enables those mundane wholesome conditions, those mundane wholesome volitions to participate in, to be active within the ongoing course of samsaric existence. Maybe that would be the broadest way to understand this.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay. Okay, Dhananjali.
Hi, Bhante.
Hi.
Is there a place that I can find more about the 20 volitions of the Arahant? And by that token, are there a set number of volitions for each, for the layperson and so on?
Yeah, there's no distinction between whether monastic or layperson, but you find all of this analysis of the different states of consciousness, the different mental factors. This is in the Abhidharma. So maybe the best introduction to the Abhidharma, if I could be excused for blowing my trumpet a bit, is a work called the Comprehensive Manual of Abhidharma.
Great.
Which you could even download from the website of pariyatti.com. And I think it might even be on our BAUS website, because I'll be giving the Abhidharma. Let me also advertise, next week that's the Labor Day weekend, I will be giving on 3 days, continuing the Abhidharma program on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday for 2 hours each day, from 1 to 3 p.m. And you can enroll for that through the BAUS website. You'll see it, a panel for it on the BAUS website. And I think through that panel, you find the electronic version of the comprehensive manual. Though if you prefer a paper version, then you can order it either through the publisher pariyatti.com, or if you're in the US, through Pariyatti, or through Amazon or any of the other online book dealers.
I took your course, so I think I have it on electronically.
Okay. If you took the my Abhidhamma course earlier, then you should have it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, let's see. On phone.
Thank you, Bante. Bante, my question is a practical one. Because I think ignorance is the underlying condition for everything. And I saw in the Visuddhimagga, they divide it into 3 different types of character, like temperament. And with someone who have a strong root of delusion, do you think jhana is dangerous practice for them because eventually they still have all the ignorance, like the jhana, the direction of jhana practice is dangerous because it's not.
I would never say that the practice of jhana itself is dangerous. I've heard some people say that, but I don't agree with that. If you have enough understanding, especially when you're acquainted with the Buddha Dharma, then you know that the jhanic state is not the final goal itself, that it's just a platform, so to speak, that can be used for developing panya or wisdom. Then if you have a inclination to develop the jhanas, or even the talent, the aptitude for developing them, then I would say, go ahead and develop the jhanas. But you always have to have the wisdom to be able to, to examine them and to understand that they are not themselves the final goal. And then you use the wisdom or insight to investigate the jhanic states to see that they too are marked with impermanence, dukkha, and non-self. Then they can become a very powerful tool for liberation. Okay.
Thank you, Bante.
Rita?
Yes, thank you, Bante. May I have a question going back to the teachings of the sutta today? When the sutta talk about an arahat will have no mind, no body, and no speech. Can we understand in a way that because they have developed enough wisdom to penetrate and see things according to the 3 seals, that they would have perfect equanimity, that when they face everyday things, then there won't be any pleasant or unpleasant feelings arise, and they can do things or they can handle things accordingly, but without any pleasant or unpleasant emotions. Can I understand it in that way?
I think you could understand that an arhat would have, let's say, persistent or perpetual equanimity. We wouldn't say that the arhat doesn't have pleasure and pain. They can experience physical pain. They might get cut. Even the Buddha was injured and had some illnesses, and he had a chronic backache, at least in his older years. So he had physical pain. And arhats will have pleasure, they won't indulge in sense pleasures, but they have pleasant experiences as well as neutral experiences. Yeah, but they don't, I think we should stay with the way the commentary explains this.
Okay.
That when it said that they don't have this body, speech, and mind, that means that their body, speech, and mind do not generate karma with the capacity to produce continued existence and to bring about pleasure and pain through the ripening of that karma. And so the arhats engage in all of these activities of body, speech, and mind, but their activities are not called karma, but the Abhidhamma uses a technical expression, a technical word. It says that their actions are kriya, or kiriya, which means mere activities, but not karmic activities.
Okay, thank you, Bhante.
Yeah. Okay, then Vinyu, I think, is the.
Yes, good
Yeah.
morning, Bhante.
Good morning.
I have this, I always think that I'm ignorant, and the ignorance is buried so deep down. And apart from, say, to constantly remind oneself about on mindfulness and sati sampajana, is there any other tools that it can help one to have a better awareness?
You mean to develop wisdom?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, well, we speak of 3 stages in the development of wisdom following the suttas. We have wisdom born of study or learning. Yeah, so this is literally the wisdom that arises from hearing the Dhamma. And so when you study the canonical texts, when you listen to Dhamma talks that explain especially the philosophical principles of the Dhamma, then you're gaining some kind of wisdom which can be used to counteract ignorance. Then the next is said to be Chinta Maya Panya. So this is the wisdom that arises from reflection. We could understand this in several ways. So we could say that this is a wisdom that arises through reflection on the teachings that one has studied and learned. So one doesn't simply listen to the teaching, but one has to reflect on them, draw out their implications, intellectually explore their implications for one's own life, how they apply to one's own life. And this way we could use this kind of wisdom born of reflection. For example, let us say that we have a close relative passes away. And so naturally there's a tendency to feel sadness, to feel sorrow, to feel grief because of that loss. And so one could then use the wisdom through, you've learned through the study of the teaching that all conditioned things are impermanent, nothing lasts forever. And also we've learned that the Buddha teaches that we have to be parted and separated from everyone who is beloved to ourselves. So if you reflect on that principle, that teaching, this can help one to deal with one's sorrow, one's grief over the loss of a loved one. So that's a sort of practical application of wisdom. But then also one could also use this wisdom born of reflection, say in day-to-day life, say somebody, you do something good, people praise you and say, oh, you're so wonderful. Oh, admire you so much. You're so great. And then you just use the wisdom. You've learned the teaching of anatta, non-self. And so you could apply that teaching to one's own situation where they're praising me for things that I've done. But what is the me here that they're praising? What is this I? It's just 5 aggregates, combination of 5 aggregates. These 5 aggregates, each of them, not mine, not I, not myself. So there's really nobody here to receive that praise. And in this way, you could overcome temporarily that kind of pride and conceit that comes from being praised. this is through using the teaching of anatta. In the case of the loss of a loved one, you use the teaching of anicca, impermanence. Okay, the third kind of wisdom, and this is the most decisive, is bhavana maya panya. This is the wisdom that arises through, sometimes we say meditation, but it's more broadly mental cultivation, particularly here, the cultivation of vipassana, of insight. But sometimes the insight has to be based on calmness, so we could say from samatha, and vipassana, the wisdom that arises through formal meditation practice. Yeah, so if you use all of these three tools, then it will help to weaken, to undermine ignorance.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay,
Sadhu, sadhu.
we'll take one more question, then I want to just briefly try to cover the last part of the sutta. Okay, this was Tom Cleary.
Yes, Bhante, thank you. My question has to do with sadness for oneself, which was touched on earlier in some comments. I'm wondering, is sadness for oneself, can it ever be a path toward wisdom? I'm thinking, for example, someone passes away, one feels sad for them, but also one feels sad for oneself because one knows one has the same vulnerability. And maybe that realization could be one of impermanence, or maybe with processing traumatic events, sometimes one might feel sorry for oneself for having undergone that. And the grief can open up, tears, and perhaps, the accompanying relaxation with tears. That could be a form of information as well.
Yeah, certainly I say that's the case. Yeah, just anything, any experience, if it's used skillfully, can become sort of the manure for growing the flowers and fruits of the path.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, let's take a brief look at the last part of the sutta, which is, I have to confess, I find rather obscure. And my suspicion, well, I'm not so sure about this, but I have a suspicion that this was originally an independent sutta, which somehow got fused with the previous sutta. Okay, so here the text speaks about 4 acquisitions of individuality. The Pali word is attabhava patilabha, which really means, the English rendering acquisition of individuality is a bit obscure. Yeah, so just here, explain that acquisition of individuality means an individual existence. So it really means what we would call a particular life mode, particular individual identity, or rebirth into a particular state. Okay, then it says there is an acquisition of individuality, a mode of personal existence in which one's own volition operates, not the volition of others. An acquisition of individuality in which the volition of others operates, not one's own volition. An acquisition of individuality in which both one's own volition and the volition of others operates, and an acquisition of individuality in which neither one's own volition nor the volition of others operates. Okay, if the Buddha said that and then got up and left, I would have no idea what he's talking about. I would understand the words. Okay, but let's see. Get some explanation from somebody who's much wiser than myself. This is the Venerable Sariputta. So he says to the Buddha that he understands in detail the meaning of the statement. Okay, I don't know whether it will be sufficient for me, but let's see. Okay, the acquisition of individuality, the mode of existence in which one's own volition operates, but not the volition of others. So here, it is by reason of their own volition that beings pass away from that group. Okay, the acquisition of individuality in which the volition of others operates, but not one's own volition. So here it is by reason of the volition of others that beings pass away from that group. Okay. The acquisition of individuality in which both one's own volition and the volition of others operate. So here it is by reason of both one's own volition and the volition of others that beings pass away from that group. Okay, but then there's the fourth is the volition, the acquisition of individuality in which neither one's own volition nor the volition of others operates. If one understands the expression volition operating, would seem to me that the fourth one would apply most clearly to human existence, or even the existence of most animals, because most people pass away not through their own volition, not through the volition of others, but involuntarily through illness, accidents, or simply through natural causes in their old age. But that's not the way Sariputta is going to explain that. Okay, so let us see what the commentary says for number 1. This is a group of beings who pass away by reason of their own volition. So the commentary explains, identifies this with a class of devas called corrupted by play or spoiled by play. And we meet this group of devas in the first sutta of the Digha Nikaya called the Brahmajala Sutra. So this is the explanation. So while they are enjoying their heavenly delights, sometimes they forget to eat and drink because they're so absorbed in their play, in their games, in their delight. And because they miss a meal, they wither away and then they die. Just like a flower garland placed in the sun. So this is said to be a certain group of devas. I think they belong to the heaven of the 33, the Tavatingsa heaven, that they always have to eat at the same time every day. If they miss a meal, then they will pass away. And sometimes these devas get so engrossed in their games that they forget to go and eat. Maybe it's like here at the monastery, they ring a gong when the meal is ready, bang, 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 and we hear the gong and we go up and take the meal. But suppose some monk or nun is so engaged in their activity, they don't hear the gong. Okay, but they can go up and eat at a later time. But for these devas, if they miss the meal, they wither away and they die. But it seems that they're not, to me, it seems that they're not dying because of their own volition. They don't want to die, but just through their negligence, they die. Okay, then we have the group of beings who pass away by reason of the volition of others. So the commentary explains this to be another group of devas called those corrupted by mind, and they dwell in the realm of the 4 great kings. And what happens with these devas is that sometimes when they meet each other, they become angry with each other. So one deva sees another deva. It's like enemies meeting on the road. And then they look at each other and their minds become full of hatred towards each other. And that hatred becomes so strong that it causes the other to pass away. So if A meets B and A looks at B with hatred, then B will pass away through the hatred of A. And when B looks at A, the hatred of B will cause A to pass away. So in this way, these beings pass away through the volition of others, not their own volition. Then the realm of beings where beings pass away, both of one's own volition and the volition of others, the commentary says that these are human beings, for people kill themselves and also kill others. And so they perish both on account of their own volition or because of the volition of others. I say, yeah, that's true, but probably the overwhelming majority of human beings pass away, not because they're killed by others, not because they kill themselves, but they die from illness, accidents, or simply old age. Okay, then we come to the fourth type, those who pass away neither of their own volition nor the volition of others. And even Sariputta doesn't know the answer to this, but he identifies it with some kind of devas. And then the Buddha says that these are the devas of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. This is the fourth formless plane of existence. Yeah, it's a bit obscure to me. Okay, then Sariputta asks, why is it that some beings who pass away from that group are returners who come back to the state of existence? I guess back to the sense sphere realm of existence, while others are non-returners who do not come back to sense sphere existence or desire realm existence. And then the Buddha says that there are some person here has not abandoned the lower fetters, the 5 lower fetters, but this person can be, he enters and dwells in the meditative attainment of neither perception nor non-perception. He becomes attached to that state. And then when he dies, he passes away and is reborn in the plane of neither perception nor non-perception. But he still has not eliminated the 5 lower fetters. So he still has the fetter of sensual desire and ill will, which are the strong conditions for rebirth in the sense sphere realm, the desire realm. So when he passes away from the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, he can come back to rebirth in the desire realm. Coming back, I don't think they come back to rebirth in the planes of misery, the animal realm or the hell realm or the ghost realm, but they can come back to rebirth in the sense sphere heavens or into the human existence. But here we have another person who has abandoned the lower fetters, cut off the lower fetters. And then this person attains the meditative absorption of neither perception nor non-perception. So when this person passes away, they are reborn in the realm of neither perception nor non-perception. So when they're reborn in the realm of neither perception nor non-perception, it's possible in that realm that they attain arhatship and then they're liberated. But it's also possible that they pass away, that they do not attain arhatship in the base of neither perception nor non-perception. And so they're not yet entirely free from rebirth, but when they pass away from the base of neither perception nor non-perception, they don't come back to rebirth in the desire realm. I believe that they will continue to take rebirth in the base of neither perception nor non-perception until they attain arhatship. Yeah, because from the base of neither from the realm of neither perception or non-perception, there is no rebirth into a higher realm. Yeah, so those who are reborn in the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception as non-returners, either they are reborn there or they attain final liberation, final nibbana right there. Okay, I'm not going to take questions about that because I have to go up for the meal now. And this part of the sutta is rather obscure. So if anybody can figure it out on their own. Okay. Okay, so next week I want to repeat, please, if you're interested in the Abhidhamma, go to the BAUS website and enroll. You get a 3-day program in the chapters 5 and 6 of the Manual of Abhidhamma. This will be on the different planes of existence in the Buddhist cosmology, the karmas that lead to rebirth into these different planes of existence, the process of death and rebirth, and will be a detailed explanation of karma in that course, in that program. And then the last part of the program will be on material form as taught in the Abhidhamma. Okay, so we're going to have to end the program for today. So I'm going to end with the sharing of the merits. Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantam Nanumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanam. Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantam Nanumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam. Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantam Nanumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mam Param. Dukkha Pata Jani Dukkha Baya Pata Jani Baya Soka Pata Jani Soka Antu Sabepi Pani No. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you, Bante. Thank you,
Okay, so thank you.
Bante.
Okay, so thank you for coming.
Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay, I'll have to go up now for the meals.
Thank you,
Okay.
Bante.
Okay,
Be
so
safe,
thank you.
Bante. Have a good weekend.
Okay.
Be safe.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you.
Be
Okay.
well.
Be well.
Okay,
Love
bye-bye.
you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, love you. Thank
Okay,
you.
bye-bye. Okay, thank you.
Yes, we
Take
all
care.
love you.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
Live a long time.
It's
Yes.
just 5 aggregates, just 5 aggregates. Not mine, not I, not
Metta,
myself.
Metta, we share the Metta
You're a
with you.
gift to us, Bante. You're a gift to the world. Thank
Okay,
you.
okay.